Moving towards peace, reconciliation, and reintegration is what Afghans agree on. We must reach out to all of our countrymen, especially our disenchanted brothers.
The aim of this project is, as we reported, to reintegrate up to half the Taliban, which is, you're looking at sort of 12,500 fighters. And certainly the people on the ground are confident that there are that many lower and middle ranking members of the Taliban who can be persuaded to change sides, essentially.
It only took a short walk outside the conference gates to find people who think talking to the Taliban was a bad idea.
Why are you here today?
Okay, we are here as Afghanistani communities. We express our deep concern and disappointment in our government and Karzai government. Reconciliation and compromise, talk with Taliban is a waste of time. Taliban basically vanished or died already.
Why are you here today, guys?
I'm here today to protest against the reconciliation of Taliban with the Afghan government. We need to first take the views and opinions of the Afghan people before making such a rash decision. The Taliban are a terrorist group who have committed many genocides during their occupation. They have oppressed women, they have tortured women, domestic violence has increased during their reign. They had women weren't allowed to walk outside without escorts. They would break their legs off or cut their hands. They're a terrorist group who are against humanity, and we want to protest against against having peace talks with them or reconciliation. They do not understand the meaning of democracy. There's no reason in talking with a group who have no social kind of aims and goals.
There are also those who feel that by talking to the Taliban, NATO forces were adopting a divide and rule strategy where a weakened Taliban would make a long-term occupation of Afghanistan easier. Back at the Stop the War conference, Seamus Milne, renowned columnist with the Guardian newspaper, sees talks with the Taliban as a way of the West trying to restore its battered reputation.
Because their idea is that they can start to withdraw the troops, some of the troops, when they've changed the balance of power in Afghanistan, and then they can bring the Taliban in as a weaker player in a settlement that suits Western power. And that's why British soldiers are dying now in Helmand province and in Afghanistan. They're dying to divide and buy off bits of the resistance to the occupation in that country to save Western face and power.
We grabbed Seamus for a quick chat after the conference.
You talked earlier about the London conference being a final way in which some of these Western countries can save face. Could you elaborate on that concept for us?
Well, I think the reason the occupation of Afghanistan goes on and withdrawal doesn't take place is not because there would be a bloodbath if there was a withdrawal, a negotiated withdrawal, but because the United States in particular wants to protect its credibility to project military power around the world. And after what took place in Iraq, I think it's, the United States government and administration are very concerned about being seen not to have prevailed or been successful in Afghanistan. So at the same time, they realize that their old strategy, which was to try and defeat the Taliban and to try and gain some credibility for the Karzai administration, has failed. The Karzai administration, and Karzai is completely discredited by last year's elections and the sense that he's a completely corrupt figure and a corrupt administration. And of course, far from defeating the Taliban are growing in military strength in the country and their presence is increasing. So I think there is clearly a change of strategy that is taking place, which has been signalled by people like General McChrystal and the US Defense Secretary Robert Gates in the last few days, which is that they now want to negotiate with the Taliban or parts of the Taliban. They want to talk to the Taliban, but not to bring them into a process of negotiated withdrawal, but to try and split them and to buy off bits of the resistance in the country.
Are these new strategies going to work? The early signs are less than promising. Some analysts have described Britain's presence in Afghanistan as its very own Vietnam, a costly, messy and ultimately unwinnable war. The comments by the Army's new commander have been seen as a clear indication that this may become Britain's never-ending war. General Sir David Richards said,
"I believe that the UK will be committed to Afghanistan in some manner for the next 30 to 40 years.
But what figure would you give for keeping the troops in Afghanistan? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
I would say that essentially in terms of combat troops on the ground, you're looking at somewhere between 2 to 5 year commitment. In terms of a longer term residual presence where troops are providing a ready reserve, a backup capacity to help out the Afghan National Army when they're called upon, and then a training function, you could be certainly looking into the double digits, sort of 12, 15 years and into the future. If you look at the Balkans, Kosovo, we still have presence in those countries after conflicts that started in the early 90s, and so we're going into 15 plus years. So I think you're going to see something similar in Afghanistan if the international community is serious about making this a successful project in the long term.